Meet Reed Lance Rosenthal, rancher, #1 best-selling award-winning author, and unabashedly, unapologetically on the right side of the outstanding issues of our generation. But don't try to fence him in. Sometimes his positions will surprise you, because Reed is definitely his own man, with his own opinions. You might love him, you might hate him, but you won't be able to stop listening. Step over to the right side with Reed.
Howdy, folks, listeners, viewers around the globe. I'm going to reverse this time. How's that? Around the globe, from the Gulf to the 51st state and across the United States. This is Reed Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio and the Cowboys Take on all sorts of video channels everywhere. You name it, we're on it as far as I know. And please, pass the link along if you like the show or you think there's information that people need. I'm pretty sure there is. And hit that like button, subscribe, hit that little ring-a-ding-ding so you know when these shows come out, because they're not on a set schedule. There's 1 or 2 a week, and you will be first in line for your viewing or listening pleasure. And if you just want to listen to the audio, which is just fine, you can tune into the radio website, which is ontherightsideradio.com. That is ontherightsideradio.com. And ontherightsideradio.com also has a plethora of articles which are posted with each and every show, videos, articles, you name it, that back up not only the rat-a-tat-tat of current events that I bring you, but also the major elements of each show. And this show today, of course, we're going to have our rant story. I have a quote, although not from a founder this time. And we're going to have a little rat-a-tat-tat on a very general scale, because there's so much going on, as you well know. Oh my. The articles and the videos on the website on therightsideradio.com, they will fill in the blanks. They will give you all the details that I do not have time to bring you. I mean, we could be here for weeks without end. And I don't think either one of us needs that. There's enough angst and anxiety in the world. And then I'm going to bring you exactly what I promised to bring you in the last show a few days ago, which is we talked about all the things that were going on with the riots, you know, the mostly peaceful protests with the burning buildings, overturned cars, burning cop cars, you know, military, National Guard, police, Molotov cocktails, mostly peaceful, folks. Trust me. You know, if I'm the mainstream media, I would never lead you astray. And I would never omit any details which might be considered kind of reverse censorship. In other words, we'll keep you like a mushroom in the dark, and what you don't know won't hurt you. Anyway, we talked about those riots, the fact that they were not spontaneous. I gave you the list that is known at this time of the outfits and the dark money that is behind them. They are mostly communist inspired, funded in part by Red China, funded in part by the communist elements of our own government, some of whom have been deposed from the Obama third term, cadaver standing up in front, suspended, no doubt, so he wouldn't fall over. And I promised you that in this show I was going to bring you kind of the history of these riots, because let me tell you, the mainstream media is purposely not covering these, and they've kind of drifted off the news scene. You know, it's very convenient when you can get distracted, you know. Monkey loves shiny object. And the media is really good at getting your attention off of what's the upheaval here in the United States, who's behind it, and what it really means, not the nonsense, the guise, the cloak, the psyops, and distracting you with, and they're very important things, but Iran and Israel and this, that, and the other. I mean, I can go down the list, you know, Ozzy and Harriet, you know, have a spat, whatever. They decide to throw at the wall like spaghetti to distract your attention from what really matters. Anyway, we're going to go over the history of riots like these, okay, of peaceful protests like these with, military and Molotov cocktails and burning things and all that around the globe over several hundred years. And what those, we'll call it uprising, those insurrections, which were taken taken for granted by those populations too, but they resulted in horrendous changes globally, within the nation that they occurred, and to the government, many of which got toppled, starting with exactly what you're seeing unfolding. I think it's in 56 major cities around the United States right now. Now, this past weekend, and by the way, happy Father's Day to all you dads out there. I mean, kind of a cool thing, right? We are kind of the guides, guys. And I delight in my job, and I'm happy with the result. I hope you are too. Anyway, I digress. So let's start with a little current. Actually, we'll start with a rant story. How's that? Because we just started haying a few days ago. And let me tell you, the last 3 months or 4 months have been 5 months actually, since January or a little bit before, have been absolutely butts over tea kettles. I've been busy with a story that you will hear at some time. It's going to be one of the novels. It's that good in the Threads West series, and it rivals, trust me, on every level, the treachery, the chicanery, the misplaced passion, and the shall we say adverse stances of people out here in ranchdom. That's right. We have our own Yellowstone going. Can't wait to tell you about it at some point, or write about it, or both. And on top of that, we have a ranch to run. So the ranch obviously takes a lot of time, and we've just started our haying operations. I mean, literally, the swathers came in today. This is Thursday, June 19th. I was all ready to get this show out the last 2 days, and there was no way. And as you can tell by the lighting, this is late at night. I've arranged the lighting. Master set maker that I am. Oh yeah. So that I can actually broadcast you from the primary broadcast booth here on the ranch with better sound based on what feedback we've had from people than my secondary location, which is kind of the painted pelt behind me, et cetera, for those of you who are constant followers, and there's lots of you who do that. Anyway, the haying has started, and for the last 2 or 3 days, and we have to do more tomorrow, and we have to do more the day after, we're staking out ahead of the swathing machines, because this is a mountain ranch. So it's not like you have a big 160 acre, 320 acre, whatever, flat field, and off the machines go, and they just go back and forth within the square, and it's all, all pretty and nice. And no, this ranch has a number of fields, more than 20. Some of them are as large as 26 acres, and some of them are as small as 1 acre. And all of them have twists and turns as defined by the contours of the land. And since this is the Rocky Mountains, it's rocky. And rocks do nasty things to haying equipment. I mean, really nasty things to haying equipment. So we have to go out every year, make sure the fields are clear of rocks, obstruction, posts, down fence posts, whatever, and stake the boundaries of the cut. And we also stake the boundaries of grass we want cut, grass we don't want cut, which depends on weather factors and growth and all sorts of stuff I won't bore you with. But we've been doing that the last 3 or 4 days. And in my kind of up close and personal tour of virtually every 10 square foot transect of grass on this place, I've noticed that the places which got watered, despite the fact we've had 11 inches of precipitation here in the last 5 or 6 weeks, all unexpected, and I'm not complaining. Bring it on. But I told you about the really dry conditions that persisted in this area for the last year or two, and particularly prior to this kind of deluge that came to us by the grace of much higher powers than us. But you know, the ground is so dry that unless the water was constant, in other words, you got your inch of rain, which is a lot of rain, and then you also had your ditches going to kind of keep it wet after the rain from the irrigation. The disparity in grass growth between different fields or even different portions of fields is really startling. I've really never seen anything like it before. And it's a testament to just how dry things really are, despite the blessing of unanticipated precipitation, which included, by the way, I think, 3-4 weeks ago, a 16-inch snowstorm. Bring it on. Don't bring us another one right now. That's not good for haying, but you know what I mean. The moral of this story, folks, is that always expect the unexpected. Always anticipate the unanticipated. And have a plan, even if it's in the back of your mind, although way better on paper, to deal with the what ifs, not that may come your way, but that will come your way, and how to capitalize on the opportunities and how to minimize the downside of the unexpected occurring. So that's my little story, the rant story for today. And I think the producers might be posting a few pictures. I can't promise, but hopefully there'll be some up for you to enjoy along with this show. Okay, let's start with rat-a-tat-tat, and then we're going to get into the history of so-called peaceful riots, peaceful uprisings, peaceful people in the street demonstrating that toppled nations and transformed world history. So the Supremes and the appeals courts have been pretty kind to the Constitution and the way we think over the past several weeks. I told you I was going to bring you a little update a few weeks ago. Here it is. Number one, the appeals court shot down the challenge to Trump being able to impose tariffs. Very good. The Supremes won't hear the case, therefore the law stands. On the bad news front, the Supreme Court declined to hear 2 Second Amendment cases, one out of Maryland, one out of New Jersey. And that's not good. Now, they say they're going to look at it because there's more cases in the bin, but basically they limited magazine capacity size and the type of weapons that one can own. You know, I think that's kind of an infringement on the 2A. I'm not real happy about that one. The Supreme Court did rule that there were 500,000 identified illegal aliens that could now be deported. They threw out all the various challenges by the ACLU. And by the way, on the website, on the rightsideradio.com, you'll see Trump resistance as one of the categories. If you click on that, that's the latest emails from the ACLU, you know, the lawfare arm of the DNC, from the DNC and from top Democrats, including our beloved Barry Obama, and what they're telling their useful idiots out there. And it's quite interesting to read. It's the departure from reality is stunning. I'll just leave it at that. They also ruled that illegal criminal aliens can be deported, not really without due process, but should we say in a most expedited fashion. Great ruling. And they ruled that DOJ could have access to all government records, including Social Security records, you know, where we have 21 plus or minus million dead people or 200-year-old people getting our checks from our tax dollars and robbing the system, which is teetering on the edge of bankruptcy over the next 8 years anyway. So that was a good one. Also, they ruled that the Trump administration can indeed fire top bananas in various agencies and departments. There's over 2,000 in the United States government. I think we're a little overgrown. And there's nothing that they can do about it. That was a big ruling. Get rid of the, shall we say, the Obamaites. out there. And they just ruled a few days ago that transgender affirming care is not a right. It is a privilege, and states can regulate it, and there's nothing that folks who disagree can do about it. And, I think that's a major win. And it's going to lead to other changes, which, by the way, if you follow sports, and I don't, I follow the news, and sometimes that includes sports. If you follow sports, you'll notice that at the Olympic level, at the national level, at the international level, all of a sudden, there's chromosome tests as to whether you're a man and a woman. It goes back to the basic principle, which, by the way, the Supreme Court ruled on, I think it was about a month and a half ago, that a man is a man, a woman is a woman, and there's only two sexes. Wow, what a radical concept. Pending still, however, and you can kind of keep your nail biting going on this one, are several cases on election integrity, mail-in ballots, proving that you're a U.S. citizen to vote, and other matters which I will keep you informed of. On the international front, which is really where the action is right now, other than the peaceful protests and burning cities scattered across the United States, that little thing out there that nobody's talking about anymore. Russia is bombing the living hell out of Kiev. Drones, missiles, airstrikes, you name it. And they are solidly but slowly gaining ground along basically the whole front in eastern Ukraine. Europe supposedly is mobilizing, folks. Whew. Wow. What is that? That 75,000 person French army and the 60,000 person British army? I'm sure Vlad is quaking in his boots, and he's telling his 2 million man army and his legions of tanks that they can turn out about 10 of each day over there. Be very careful, be very scared. I'm sure that's what he's telling you. Europe is also planning to start to build its own defense industry. Build its own missiles and build its own tanks and blah, 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 blah. Right now, I think Germany is about the only one that can build tanks. And Germany is kind of on its economic butt because of socialist rule for the last 20 years and the Green New Deal and who knows what else. That's going to affect USA defense contractors, folks. Lockheed and all the rest of them, Boeing, who kind of, shall we say, don't dislike war. They kind of like war because they get to ship their stuff all across the world to buyers, which up to this time have included Europeans. But after this time, if you can believe the Europeans, will not include the Europeans because, by God, they're going to build their own tanks and armored personnel carriers, their rockets, and, get out of our way because here comes the EU. Okay, you bet. Like I said, I'm sure Vlad is quaking in his boots, and I'm sure China is too. You betcha. China, they have deployed their carriers to the South China Sea, to the south, I believe it is, of Taiwan, which is interesting. I still think that the Chinese are too smart to actually try an invasion of Taiwan. I mean, they're going to screw with Taiwan in every way they can, in every mental way they can, in physical way, and cyber way. They're going to screw with them. But the fact that they've deployed their 3 carriers, and that's what they have, their 3 carriers to just south of Taiwan in the midst of this hotly contested waters between Japan, the Philippines, Vietnam, Taiwan, China, you name it, is going to be distracting to the United States, which is, I think, exactly their intention. And I talked about this on, I think, 2 shows ago. Russia doesn't want peace in Ukraine because China has told them they don't want peace in Ukraine because it keeps the United States distracted and spending money. I mean, anybody can look at the United States balance sheet and figure out that the more money you make the United States spend, the worse the United States is. Not that China is any bastion of financial stability either right now. That's a whole nother story, which we'll probably get into in an upcoming future show. Then we have the Iran-Israel conflict. This is an interesting one. I've talked about it on the last few shows briefly, but it's beginning to solidify now. The big risk that Israel took to try and kind of neutralize things quickly, decapitation strike, etc., didn't work. I mean, yes, they inflicted severe damage on Iranian top brass and Iranian facilities, but it didn't work. Iran is not out of the boxing ring. They still have their gloves on. And now there's missile volleys and drone volleys and all sorts of things going on. Israel says it has complete air superiority. Well, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. PSYOPs in the time of war can come from friend or foe. In fact, it will come from friend or foe. But the really key thing in the Israel-Iran conflict is what Turkey, with probably the most powerful military over in that part of the world, is going to do. And Erdogan kind of does what's best for Erdogan. Never mind, he's a NATO member. He will go with the side he thinks is going to win. And the United States apparently might, because Trump is being pretty cagey, as he should be, by the way, might overtly enter the Iran-Israel war. A number of B-2 and B-1 bombers have been sent over to that region or within striking distance. 3 carrier groups have been moved in. I think a 4th is on the way. I mean, it's a massive display of American power. On the other hand, you know, don't rule out the dangers to that American power from players like what's left of the Houthis and Iran itself, which calls into question the straits through which all these tankers pass. So, you know, if you have a way to store fuel, this might be a good time to do it. And you know what? If it doesn't happen, terrific. I mean, I hope it doesn't happen. You'll be able to use the fuel, and I'm sure it will not go to waste. And if it does happen, then you might have fuel you might not otherwise have at a far lesser price. Just saying. And then we have, shall we say, the potential entry of the U.S. into other conflicts. For instance, the conflicts in Congo, in Africa, which is all resource driven. I mean, all these conflicts, all these grabs for territory by Russia, by China, by the United States, is all part of this mix and match of the unipolar world it is a tripolar world. And hopefully to result in what the show I brought you about, I don't know, 6-7 months ago, which I think is Western Hemisphere to the U.S., Asia to China, and Russia taking over Eastern Europe and Eurasia. We hope. If anybody gets out of line or gets a little greedy, then all hell could break loose. And I hope you're prepared. Now, as you probably know, these demonstrations were supposed to have millions of people in the street. They didn't have millions, but they had hundreds of thousands in many cities, like in the aggregate, across the United States this previous weekend. Okay, and they're planning more shenanigans this weekend. And it's probably going to grow as they, shall we say, more useful idiots congregate to the communist magnet. But this is not about immigration. This is not about civil rights. This is not about race. This is about communism and the attempted overthrow of the United States government and subversion of its constitution. That's what this is really about. All you have to do is look at the cast of players that are supporting it and funding it, including our buddies over there in Red China. So let me bring you a few, should we say, uprisings here and around the globe over the past, give or take 150 years, which changed the world that existed at that time, much to everybody's complete surprise. And I'm bringing you this story so that you are not completely surprised and that you can take the necessary actions to try and help the people who believe in the Constitution and America tamp this down, and so that you can be prepared. Do you remember the Democratic National Convention riots way back there in the summer of 1968 in Chicago? They were huge. And basically, they changed the perception of people's, or shall we say, changed people's perception of government. The New York City draft riot, 1863. Okay, this is in 1863, the New York City draft riot was a huge civil uprising during the American Civil War. It almost ended conscription and doomed the Union's chances to win the war. It was put down, by the way, by troops. And it was mostly peaceful. Arson, looting, destruction, kind of like today. Kind of like the Summer of Love in 2020. How about the Chicago West Side riots in 1968? April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And the riots that ensued, for any of you who remember it or those of you who have studied it, really kind of threatened and became the basis, because LBJ had just recently passed his Great Society, of affirmative action and other things which changed the landscape of American culture. Police militarization and the death of that young man in Ferguson, Missouri, later proven to be entirely justified. He had grabbed for the cop's gun, etc. But think about what happened there in August of 2014 and what that did to the country and to the strain in race relations and the creation of the victim mentality, orchestrated beautifully by Obama, who was in power at that time. We're dealing with that today, in DEI, folks. It's all interconnected. And then we have the LA riots. No, not the ones of today. Nope. Do you remember the guy by the name of Rodney King? He was killed there on April 29th, 1992. 53 people died in those riots. 3,000 were injured. $1 billion in property damage. And once again, a rift in American social architecture, social fabric, which continues to this day, although improving. And all of these things resulted in legislation because, our politicians want to get reelected so they can continue their corruption and graft. How about the Watts riots of 1965? They were probably this is along with the Great Society by LBJ. The Watts riots of 1965 were a pivotal point in the African American civil rights movement. I mean, they literally tore LA down, just like they're kind of doing right now. The Rodney King riots in the United States in 1992. 4 police officers, who were later acquitted, by the way, were accused of beating a black man by the name of Rodney King. Once again, the victim mentality, the separation of the races. Remember, the aim of the government, folks, is to keep us apart. The last thing they want is for us all to unite to face the common foe. And the common foe is not each other. It is not each other. The Hong Kong riots in China in 1967. So this is a really interesting one. The Hong Kong riots of 67, it was extreme civil unrest. There were labor strikes. There were political tensions in the city. It started with a factory labor dispute but quickly developed in a widespread revolt against British colonial rule. And what did it end up in? The British left, you had the Hong Kong Accord, and now Red China has Hong Kong. It all started in 1967 with those peaceful riots. The Egyptian bread riots of 1977. Probably even haven't heard of those, right? Because our press is so good at keeping you informed. So in 1974, Egypt's president at that time, Anwar Sadat, later assassinated, and who, with Begin from Israel, formed the first real peace and alliance between an Arab nation and Israel. He was implementing an open door policy for immigration. Sound familiar? And the folks in Egypt didn't like that much. And the previous regime, previous to Anwar Sadat, had a program of nationalization, which is really what the people wanted. Does this sound familiar, by the way? 11 million illegal aliens across our borders? Yeah, okay. History does repeat. Rinse and repeat, folks. Rinse and repeat. So there were riots in Cairo and Alexandria, and the government had to deploy the army to quell the riots. And this was really this was a key turning point in Egypt's history, which affects the Middle East, which affects Israel and Iran today. The Copper Riot in Russia in 1662, that's right, 400 years ago. So Russia's Copper Riots in 1662, anger erupted because there was a struggling economy. You're going to hear this theme a lot. And a riot broke out in Moscow. So Russians demanded the surrender of alleged traitors who had caused this economic decline. I think we call them elites now. And they demanded lower taxes, etc. The rioters were really viciously put down, although they fought for a long, long time. And it's a severe suppression that was orchestrated by the Tsar, who began the unraveling of the entire system of government in Russia, although it took a couple hundred years, that resulted in Lenin's revolution, which, by the way, in 1917, 1918, and I brought you this specific historical story, was accomplished. They overthrew the Russian government with less than 300 people. Days of demonstrations, and then 300 people stormed the Russian capital, and it was all over. Think about that. Think about that. And then we have the Detroit riot in the United States in 1967. This was huge. It was one of the most significant events of the United States civil rights movement. July 23rd, 1967, Detroit police officers raided this unlicensed, mostly African-American establishment. Emotions blew up. Unrest lasted over a week, 43 deaths, thousands of injuries, and fires throughout the city, destroying hundreds, if not thousands, of buildings. It was the beginning. If you remember, Detroit was Detroit. I mean, it was Motor City. They were rocking it. This began the precipitous decline of Detroit into the skeleton of itself that it is, or that it was today. All right, so we have the Bombay riots in India, 1992 and 1993. Once again, because of the great job that our press does, you probably have never heard of these. But the Bombay riots, also known as the Mumbai riots, were a violent series of community and communal clashes. By the way, mostly kind of kindled up, if you will, because of the rift between Muslims and Hindus. The religious identity and economics seem to be a really common thread in these riots, along with politicians, because you want to keep everybody divided, inciting whatever fans of flames work in that particular country, black versus white, old versus young, transgender versus straight, whatever it happens to be. So both the Hindus and the Muslims kind of experienced the repercussions, and there were a series of retaliatory, really vicious attacks. 1,000 lives were lost in Bombay in less than a month. And there was a devastating bomb blast in March of 1993 that killed 250 people. It led to significant changes in India's social fabric, which is manifesting itself today in India's kind of playing on the fence between the East and the West, between the West and the BRICS countries. It's really interesting to see how these events shape nations' destinies and nations' perceptions 50, 100, 150 years later. It's pretty amazing. The Nika riots in Turkey in the year 532. How's that for going back into time? But it's all the same, folks. History rhymes, history repeats, rinse and repeat. And this came up with chariot racing, believe it or not. And there was a group of athletes, chariot folks, and they were arrested and they were executed in their involvement in, the government said, murders. Others sought refuge in a nearby church. And there was a massive mob that gathered around this church, and they unfolded at a really critical juncture in the government, in the reign of Emperor Justinian of Rome. And he had faced issues around rising taxes. There's your economic element again. And delicate negotiations that Rome was involved in with the Persians. Oh, there's Iran again. Wow, amazing. Justinian made a really big mistake. He tried to appease the crowd rather than trying to control the crowd. I'm not saying appeasement is good, control is good, but in the terms of what happened there, it was a huge mistake. So he rescheduled the chariot race that had been kind of blown to smithereens by all these arrests and all sorts of things that had gone on. And the result was they almost drove the Emperor of Rome into exile. And it severely limited his ability to govern for the rest of his life, because it was a life deal, obviously, which severely affected Rome's ability to resist the decaying forces within it, the corruption, and outside its walls, the barbarians. Pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. The Great Arab Revolt. This is in Palestine. 1936 to 1939. This is right around the formation time of Israel, 1938-39. And this was a significant uprising. It was led by Palestinian Arabs against the British, who ruled that area as a remnant of the World War I Versailles Treaty. And it was about Jewish immigration into the area, right? Jews were immigrating to the area. They were getting ready to form an independent state of Israel. And what's really interesting is that the British proposed a two-state solution. Where have we heard that? This is back in 1936, folks. That's almost 100 years ago, two-state solution. And the Israelis, well, the Jews who were soon to be Israelis when Israel formed, and the Arabs who were living there in Palestine, and I'm not going to get into the whole thing of what was happening 2,000 years ago with the Hebrews, etc. It's not the point of this show. But they failed to agree. And Arab guerrilla fighters were conducting attacks against the British and against the Jewish immigrants. Thousands of Palestinians suffered casualties and arrests and exile. British military courts. I mean, it was a mess. And the British established Peel Commission, P-E-E-L, recommended the partitioning of Palestine into the separate nations. This is where the two-state, quote-unquote, solution came from. Two-state solution is not new. And it didn't work then and is not working now. Anyway, the British suppressed the result through military force, of course, and political strategies and intelligence operations. But this was the seeds of what we now see in Lebanon with Hezbollah, in the Gaza Strip with Hamas, and in Iran trying to extend its hegemony across the entire Middle East. And then we have, as my stuff falls over, the March 1st movement in Korea in 1919. Japan had annexed Korea. Probably don't know that, but it's true. In 1910. And Korea said, we're not Japanese, we're Koreans, and you guys need to leave. Yeah, rightfully so. That desire for sovereignty began to take hold and began to manifest itself in riots and demonstrations and all sorts of other types of nasty stuff. And stuff does get nasty over there in Asia. On March 1, 1919, which is the commemoration date of the original Korean emperor, that was their starting point that they chose. And there was an uprising against the Japanese rule. It was initially kind of peaceful, and then it grew really violent. And Japanese troops started responding violently, like with real bullets. More than 2 million civilians, 2 million civilians participated in these various demonstrations. Korea is not a huge country, folks. There's a lot of people in the streets. And finally, 46,000 of them were arrested, thrown in prison, some executed. 7,600 lives were lost in the space of a few months. And although the March 1st movement kind of fell short of its goal of kicking out the Japanese, they began the process. They greatly weakened Japan's grip on Korea. And eventually, right, about 10 years later, 15 years later, they became the provisional government of the Republic of Korea, which is rather influential and resulted in the split of South Korea and North Korea. And of course, we're dealing with both today. And then we have a Korean War in there too, by the way. But that's where it began, way back there at the end of World War I. And then we have the bloody, we have the French Revolution, of course, right? Let them eat cake. You know what happened to those folks. And that was the peasants uprising against the elites. And Robespierre, right? The kind of the jackal of the uprising, if you will. It resulted in a complete transition in government in France, which affected all of Europe and is the basis of the socialist tendencies of Europe today. That's right. Began as a demonstration in a street in Paris. That's how it began. Then you have the Bloody Week in France. You go back in a little bit here. France of 1871. That particular, shall we say, uprising was an uprising to gain even more. We call them socialists. They called them, kind of a Robin Hood type thing. Take from the rich and give to the poor. But France has been the precipitator through these two events, major events, of the socialism that you see that pervades the European countries, which is exactly why Russia is not scared at all. Zero. The 228 massacre in Taiwan. Oh, here we are back to Taiwan, 1947. So Japan surrendered in World War II, obviously, Taiwan was transferred to China as a temporary military occupation. But the Chinese, they kind of established a regime. You know, the Chinese are kind of smart, never let an opportunity go to waste. Rahm Emanuel, okay? They probably had a Rahm Emanuel over there. And when there was discontent spreading and economic hardships, particularly for the poor people in Taiwan, the tipping point came in February of 28th, 1947. There was a old lady, a widow, selling cigarettes without a license, and she was arrested and brutally beaten, and Taiwan kind of erupted. Isn't it amazing how the treatment of one person, Rodney King, Martin Luther King, I mean, major figure in assassination, but the kid there in Ferguson, how one person blows up the powder keg. It's really interesting. You can see that no matter what nation, wherever, whenever in history. It's remarkable. Anyway, the massive protests throughout the region, by the way, government offices were burned down, and they pretended, the government did, to negotiate, but they were secretly mobilizing troops to suppress the resistance. And the crackdown resulted in the deaths of 28,000 Taiwanese, and numerous random arrests. People don't even know how many people disappeared, if you were. And it was called the White Terror period, which is pretty interesting. And Taiwan was under martial law by the Chinese until 1987. Really interesting. And then we have, let's see, there's so many. The Indian partition in India in 1947. So remember when we talked about those Mumbai riots? That began a long process where India divorced from British rule and became the India that we deal with today, and the India that's a check on China and Pakistan today. And we better really like India. So after nearly a century of British rule, India finally achieved independence in 1947. The British partitioned the land. Now listen to this. And in the partition, they created India and they created Pakistan. And what do we know about India and Pakistan? Oh, that's right. That's one of the flashpoints on the planet Earth today. Both nuclear powers, both of them hate each other. India is Hindu, Pakistan is mostly Muslim, and here we go. Rinse and repeat, we go. History. It's amazing. It's amazing. And the border between India and Pakistan was hastily drawn because the British wanted to get the hell out of the mess. And because it was hastily drawn, it did not really solidify which outfit, India or Pakistan, owned the region called Kashmir, which is where all the clashes are now taking place between two nuclear powers, who I think would rather not, but probably would not hesitate to use them if they had to. Okay. And then we have the Arab protests, the Arab Spring, Obama's Arab Spring. Yes, he did a good job on that one with a little help from the CIA. All over social media. This is like the practice run for what they're doing now. And the Arab Spring was a term coined by the Western media. Okay, the spring of Arabs. Wow, psyops. At early 2011, this is not too long ago, there were protests, there were uprisings, there were unarmed rebellions, there was burning and looting and, the whole nine yards, the peaceful protests, which spread and spread and spread, and eventually toppled 4 Arab governments, okay? Changed the basic structure of 4 Arab governments. And the brutality of the security apparatus that was used against these people. I mean, it wasn't just National Guard standing there in a line preventing people from burning buildings. It was brutality. Empowered the Arabs that were protesting and fanned the flames through social media of an event, kind of a long series of events that would change the shape of the Mideast and has resulted in the current Israeli Hezbollah, Israeli Hamas, and Israeli Iran, and hopefully not, but potentially Israeli Turkey disputes. You know, it's amazing. And in this case of the Mideast, the uprisings I told you about previously, a few minutes ago, and this one dovetailed, right? One kind of fomented the other. One was the foundation of the next. And the building crescendo is what finally created the change which shaped the world in a whole different way than it had shaped before. And then we have, back to the United States, this is a really interesting one for you, the riots that paved the way for the gay movement in the United States. You probably don't know this, but they were called the Stonewall riots. And they were really the catalyst of the LGBT civil rights, quote unquote, movement in the United States. There were just a few places back then, okay, that allowed, tolerated, or could be openly gay anywhere in the United States. I mean, it was pretty much taboo. And at the time of the riots, one of the places where people could be openly gay was in Greenwich Village, which is still the same today, in New York. June 28th, 1969, there was a group of customers at a popular gay bar, and it was called the Stonewall Inn. And they stood up to the police. The police raided the place to arrest them because they were homosexuals. And I don't agree with that at all. I mean, don't foist it on me. Don't be raising flags over my Capitol with whatever your beliefs are. But if you want to be gay, you go be gay. Have a great life. Anyway, at the time of the riots in 1969, nobody had yet stood up to the police. Well, these patrons in Greenwich Village did. 200 patrons in the bar refused to cooperate, and as word spread throughout New York and Greenwich Village, they were joined by thousands of others. I mean, like, rapidly. And the police found themselves not only outnumbered, but penned into the bar that they had come in to raid. Protesters threw bottles at them, and the cops couldn't do anything but barricade themselves inside the stone wall for their own safety. And that is really the birth of the LBGT movement in the United States. And of course, you know where that has come today. So I think those are all interesting for you. And by the way, they're just a smidgen. But the point I'm trying to make is, do not underestimate what is going on in these 56 cities and elsewhere around the United States right now. And the more the mainstream media, who is leftist and biased and psyops and untruthful, omits details, which is the worst form of censorship, and doesn't bring you the news on this, the more dangerous it is. There's a reason there's troops, I think now in 7 cities, 7,000 of them in LA, 500 Marines in Denver. I think there's been 1,000 arrests down there in Denver. You don't hear anything about this, do you? This is a major deal, and you need to track it, and I'll do my best to help you do that. Next show, real estate markets around the United States. Getting a little dicey, folks. Getting a little dicey. So I'm going to do for you my promised every month or two review of what's happening with real estate markets, which affects your home or your land or your property, no matter where you are. In the meantime, I'm going to be baling some hay, cutting, raking, and baling some hay, and I hope you have a great weekend. Keep the wind at your back. We'll talk to you soon. Read Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio and the Cowboys Take.
Please remember, if you've missed any shows, just click on Show Archive and you'll find all of his shows. We look forward to seeing you here again next week for another episode of Read Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side.